We're going to cover biomarkers, or more specifically, digital biomarkers. And I think this is a very interesting area in digital health, very fast moving area as well. Perhaps because, and at the heart of it, there's three sort of intersecting circles here, really, which is devices, including smartphones, sensors, Apple Watch, Fitbit, quite a long list there, and increasingly quite a few specialist sensors for diabetic and other chronic diseases for home use. And of course, there's all the clinical medical devices as well. So all of that is generating a huge amount of data. And if you just think about the volume and the variety of data that can now be collected, this is just a quick snapshot: BPM, cardiac health, temperature, smartphones that can do sweat analysis now, tremor analysis, which is helpful for Parkinson's disease, body composition measurement using smartphone video cameras to give you measurements of things like BMI, weight, of course, blood oxygen levels, brain activity, the list goes on and on. And then if you start to add to that DNA, and we're going to hear from Wishan all about DNA a little later, there's a huge amount of data that we as human beings are generating and is now being measured and captured by these devices. And with that comes some amazing, powerful opportunities for preventative health and positive health outcomes. But with it comes some concerns as well, concerns around privacy and security. Who owns my data? Who's got access to my data? Do I, the patients, own that data, or do states own that medical data? How do we manage and allow access to that data? And other concerns around insurance exclusion. If I have DNA that's perhaps highlighting a genetic issue I wasn't aware of before, what does that mean for whether I can get cover in the future and at what price? So lots of really interesting topics there to discuss. Hopefully we're going to cover at least some of them this afternoon in the next hour or so. Do ask any questions as before in the Q&A. We were going to take some of those towards the end of the session. But I'm going to introduce three very interesting panelists, and I'm going to hand over to you guys shortly just to hear a little bit about who you are, your role. Just give us the elevator pitch on your venture. We are going to come back and spend a little bit more time talking about exactly what you're doing in each of your ventures. So you are going to get opportunity to talk more about it. And then we're going to, towards the end, talk about some of those issues I just talked about. So privacy, what are the overall health benefits of digital biomarkers, and data privacy and so on. But without further ado, let's hear from the panelists. So Gaurav, you've drawn the short straw. All right. I'm going to ask you to give us a quick intro, Gaurav, about you and your venture.
I go first because we start with A, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Gaurav Mukherjee. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Activa Labs. And a bit about what we do at Activa Labs is that we are here to keep a healthy population healthy. And we believe that good health really drives happier, connected societies. So the last 3 years, we have scientifically developed the Activa score, which is a digital biomarker that predicts health and longevity. It looks into your last 24 hours and how you spend across different physical activities, and then tells you what is that impact on your long-term health. But around the score, we have created a lot of different journeys that helps the financial services industry, namely life and health insurance companies and banks and telcos, have a conversation with their customers around health and well-being. And that's what our endeavor has been in terms of taking that score, that digital biomarker that we have built, putting it in the hands of as many people as we can over the last 3 years. We have done that so successfully in terms of we have 120,000 users on the platform. Across 13 markets, we have paid users using the score and making good decisions about their day-to-day living. Yeah, that's a bit about us. And we are headquartered in Singapore and looking forward to listening to the rest of the panel and sharing my views. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much for that, Gaurav. Michelle, great to meet you. First
Likewise.
time we've spoken. Thank you for joining this. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about you and your venture.
Sure. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mind Science Health. So what we are is a cloud-based brain health platform. And what we do is we take digital biomarkers such as EEG signals, and we do the interpretation and analysis of those signals for epilepsy patients, as well as the ability to monitor patients in the ICU, in the neuro ICU, that have non-convulsive seizures, which obviously are hard to detect unless you sit in front of a EEG, which is impossible in the ICU. The other thing that we do is we also monitor patients with the mental health issues, starting with schizophrenia, and a specific area of schizophrenia, which are called negative symptoms, which are really the debilitating symptoms that affect the quality of life. And the fact that those patients on average die about 28 years earlier than the population because they develop all kinds of comorbidities, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, etc. So we're able to monitor those patients by analyzing their audio and visual signals. The platform as all, and I mean, I know it's right now, it's kind of the in thing, but from day one, which is 5+ years ago, we developed our platform to be available for telehealth and remote monitoring. And that's always been our DNA. And so we're native to that. And so basically that's the elevator pitch. And I look forward to the panel.
Great, Michelle. That sounds a really interesting area. Look forward to learning more. Whereabouts are you based?
In Singapore. We're based in Singapore. Yeah.
Great, great. Okay. Wishan, welcome. Great to see you again. Tell us a little bit about you.
So Wishan over here. So I'm based in Malaysia. So by professional, I'm a pharmacist. Right now, I'm a co-founder and CEO of a startup over in Malaysia called Advanced Health. So as Matt has introduced us earlier, where we fundamentally look at genetic or DNA in a layman term of a person, and then we help them to understand what is inherited in their body, then using various or personalized services that help the customers to find out more about themselves, and they can use all these services to make themselves healthier and better. On the other side, our goal is also to help a pharma company to identify patients who in need of targeted approach medications therapy, and that's where our long-term goals, because I'm a pharmacist, I understand how the pharma industry will look into a particular patient using on a genetic basis. So that's what we do, and looking forward to chat a lot more. Super,
thanks for that, Wishan. Guys, I'm going to start actually with a general question here, which is just to get a level set for everybody, us plus the audience. Digital biomarkers, actually, what are they? How do we define them? What are they? How are they different perhaps from traditional biomarkers? Gaurav, I'm going to throw this one to you to start off with.
Well, it is exactly what it says. It's a digital biomarker because it's a very complex concept to grasp, and I think that's why they kept the naming convention quite simple. So biomarkers just gives us a glimpse into the biological state of our being, would have some prognostic or diagnostic value of some kind, or be able to predict something about our biological state of being in the future, or describe our current state. Now, digital biomarker is exactly that. It is a biomarker that is attained through digital means. The data that is coming in to get us to that or understanding of our biological state, if that has been done through digital means, then it's a digital biomarker. So if it's been captured from wearables, fitness trackers, your smartphone metadata, ECG, pocket ECGs, or even for that matter, your PPG. I think, digital biomarkers have been around for a while. It's not something new. When we used PPG to send light into your fingers and getting that back using an algorithm to say that that's your SpO2 levels, that is actually a digital biomarker. So that's exactly what it is. And the use cases for that is really about how can the digital biomarkers 2.0 help us in our endeavor for better prevention, predict and prevention and improving the state of healthcare as a whole. So that's how I look at it. I like to keep it simple, and that's exactly what my understanding of digital biomarkers are.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary there. Guys, any other comments to add to that?
I think to add to what Gaurav said, I mean, he said it perfectly. It's also the ability to use those markers outside of the clinical setting, right? Being able to monitor people within their home environment, etc. So for example, in EEG, there's a big push to be able to monitor people remotely, okay? The problem right now is the hardware. There's nothing that's available that's FDA approved, etc. Mental health, same thing, you know. You need to be able to monitor people outside the clinical setting. So that's what digital biomarkers enable you to do, is the ability through whatever means, whether it's a phone or sensor or some other piece of kit, to be able to collect data that you can digitally process and manipulate.
Yeah. And Wisham, DNA is sort of kind of capturing some of the information, but in a different way, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think Michelle and Gaurav will be more onto the biomarkers that can be actionable. So I'll talk a bit something more far-fetched. So there are research papers or even companies who are trying to do this over in US, is to sequence a person, then takes a person a DNA sequence, put onto a program online, and combining with their lifestyle biomarkers, then it makes a person virtually on a program. So what right now they try to do is, can we do drug trials online? Meaning that they park a certain drugs online into this particular cohort study group together with all these virtual person, and they actually test the drug on this particular people online. So I think that is the future biomarkers can probably transform into, where pharma companies can no longer need to spend money to acquire a patient into hospital and test it. I think that's a dream for a lot of people, especially in the DNA scene.
So a huge amount of potential there. Let's bring it back down to 2020. Gaurav, tell us a little bit more about Activa, because I'm very interested in how you measure, what you measure. And I know that you've got the Activa score, which I think is like an overall kind of measure of health. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So the idea was to drive this at scale. I think what a digital biomarker or digital biomarkers would do ultimately for the society at large is to empower them with an understanding, the education about their biological state of being or what their health risks are. And again, like to Vaishyan's point, actionable insights. So that was pretty much what we set out to do. And when we wanted to do that, we said that, okay, that kind of education at scale can only be delivered through digital means. It has to be scalable and affordable. And for that to really sit with an end user, it has to be personalized to a certain extent. Now, how do you do that? You have to give them their data, and you have to turn that data into some kind of insights that sits well with them. They can engage and they understand and they remember. And then they choose to use that over a period of time if they see value, if it is personalized. So those were the criteria before we started off building Activa Labs. So the first piece we went about was, how do we make sure that it is scalable and it's digital and it can be given to everyone? So we really looked into the ubiquity of smartphones and the kind of data that it produces on a day-to-day just by simply people interacting with their smartphones, using their smartphones, keeping them switched on. And what can it tell, or what kind of a picture can it paint about that end user? So if you look deep enough, it paints a very good snapshot of your last 24 hours. And how you spend your last 24 hours can tell you a lot about your health risks, per se. So you are looking into many different, we can go deeper into the different data points, but we are just looking into some physical lifestyle data points. And from the physical lifestyle data points, based on contextualized to your age and your gender, we're trying to tell you that what are your health risks. And that is basically what the Activa score does. There are other elements that we could go into. There are other factors that definitely have an impact on your long-term health. Your socioeconomic status has an impact on your long-term health. Where you live, the air you breathe in has an impact on your long-term health. Your genetic endowment, all these are factors that looks into early morbidity or early mortality. but what we felt that what we can measure at a population in a scalable, affordable manner, and that really would move the needle, is that if we could help people to just adopt healthier lifestyles, and tell them that, what is their current lifestyle in a very simple, low touch manner. And that was the idea of Activa Score. And that's when I was quite fascinated when I started off this journey. And then I met Professor David Lai, and he was, when we started off, he was directing surgical research at the National University Hospital. He was also working with the Institute of Public Health over here. And what he did back then deeply resonated with me. And he said, just very simply is that all you need to do, adequate exercise, adequate sleep, and adequate consumption of fiber in your meals, right? So that's such a simple message. Now, how do you deliver that effectively? And that's how we went about building Activa. In the process, we ended up creating Activa Score. And the idea is that, we are very inspired by the fact that people are taking up that score, looking at it, they wake up in the morning and, they're using it as a circadian rhythm to understand what they did yesterday and what little changes they can do today and how they can plan today to have a better tomorrow. So that's what we're doing. And yeah, probably I'll come to the business model discussions later off, but we are doing that in partnership with the financial services industry. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I'd love to touch on that side of things in a little bit, but just tell us a little bit more. So it's, all you need is a smartphone, don't need any other devices. And I guess it's measuring things like activity. What other signals can you get from the smartphone?
A lot, actually. The smartphone itself gives a lot of metadata from which you can use to extrapolate into different classifiers. For example, sleep, right? You don't need to have a sleep app installed or need to wear a fitness tracker, but the way you interact with your smartphone over a period of time, if we would be able to predict sleep closer to ground truth or a golden truth like a sonograph or a smartwatch. We can look into different metadata on the smartphone itself, like connectivity to a charger, connectivity to a Wi-Fi, screen switch on, switch off times, ambience light falling on the phone. All this, if it bringing it together, it goes into our algorithm, which is basically a classifier saying sleep or no sleep. And you don't even need to keep your phone on your bed in order to do so. So the whole idea is that the user is not actively engaging with it, but when they open the application, there's a lot of insights about them per se. And the more data we capture, the smarter the whole system gets. And that's what we are doing. So there's a lot your smartphone can say. But yes, if you have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or a Garmin, we have all those integrations. Obviously, you can get this data in. But what about the majority of the users who do not wear one, right? What about the majority of what about the users who wear a fitness tracker, but they don't wear it to sleep, right? How do we get that 24-hour snapshot? So for all that, we have crossed those engineering hurdles, and we have been able to paint a fairly good snapshot of the 24 hours and say a lot about the end user. Yeah.
Right. And just give me, I think 80, I think a score of 80 on your platform. I think I'm right in saying that's a pretty good score, isn't it? But if I was, yeah. Yeah,
so what the idea is also about, if you're giving a score, you have to get the messaging correct, right? So what is the good, bad, and the ugly? So after you've given them a score, it's a number between 1 to 99, right? Now, what does that mean? What does 80 mean? So that is a big endeavor for us in terms of making sure that messaging gets as simplified and it sits better and better with the user. So what we did is we cornered the score to one number, regardless of age and gender, and telling them that follow that score, right? We did the algorithms in such a way that regardless of your age and gender, whichever way you're hitting that 80, that combination is an ideal combination that is a healthy combination, and the probability of you getting a chronic disease or developing a communicable chronic disease is significantly low. So that's what we do. And anything, again, we just go on saying that how it slightly keeps on increasing as the number goes down. We also give the users users of the application some further cues in terms of where they stand compared to their network. And the network can be men my age in Singapore, where do they stand, where I was a month back, where I am today. And then throughout, like I said, we have built different journeys that helps the user to further understand what they can do to improve their scores. We give badges if the user has slept between 7 to 9 hours. We give badges if the user has had exercise, which is anything more than a brisk walk and above, more than 30 minutes. We give a badge if the user has ended up sitting less than 8 hours a day, right? So all these things add up that, if I do these little things, it all adds up, and then, my score improves.
Yeah. Great stuff. Listen, I want to come back and talk a little bit more about kind of the outcomes and what you're seeing there a little later. Let's switch tack a little bit. Let's go to Michelle, and quite a different area, Michelle, that you're working in terms of kind of brain health and measuring brain activity. Perhaps you could just start by telling us a little bit about EEGs and what they measure, and how does your venture and your offering, how does that complement what's already perhaps in existence around EEG?
Okay, so as opposed to GORAB, which is really about wellness and awareness, right, of your health status, what we deal with is actual medical disorders. So you've already tipped over, and you've got a condition, a disorder. So EEGs, they measure brain activity. Okay, so you have an EEG cap with electrodes, and basically what those electrodes pick up are the firing of a set of neurons in specific areas of the brain, and that's the main way that you diagnose and monitor, for example, epilepsy. So having epileptic seizures, spikes that may happen after a seizure or prior to a seizure, all kinds of different brain activity, slowing activity, which we also measure, which are associated with maybe structural impairment or a stroke, for example, you'll have slowing. So we're able to pick up all those signals, analyze them, process them, and then serve them back to the neurologist or the EEG technician with a viewer that we've developed, which is web-based. Okay, so that means that you can access it anytime, anywhere. Right now, the only way for a neurologist to view the EEG is to stay in the hospital and basically capture that EEG either straight at the cart where it's taken, or through the intranet. And so, for example, some neurologists that we work here in Singapore, they travel from hospitals to hospital looking at the EEG. So obviously it's lacks productivity, and it's not very cost effective. What we're able to do is just capture that EEG. So it's all about access, actually. So for example, in places like India, so we work with about 7 hospitals in India. One of the main problems is a lot of the patients are in rural areas. And sometimes, a neurologist that can read an EEG may be 300-400 kilometers away. Therefore, nothing is done, okay? Because we're remotely based, what we can do is take that EEG, okay, bring it up to the cloud, and then serve it back to a neurologist that can read it remotely and give a diagnosis or just monitor the condition. So that's one of the things. And again, our clinical performance, we're pegged to 90% sensitivity. So our performance, the performance of our software is very high compared to actually what's commercially available. A lot of the commercially available software is beautiful software, but it lacks the meaningful clinical performance, okay? So that's what we do in neurology. And we can measure a lot of different things because we analyze a lot of different waveforms. In mental health, so what we do in mental health is capturing audio data, and optionally we can also capture visual data and infer insights from those in terms of starting with schizophrenic patients. So those markers include up to 4,000 different features that we measure, okay? In neurology, it's more than 1 million parameters that we process. But we measure what are the relevant features for schizophrenia, for example, in negative symptoms. So the way you speak, the speed at which you speak, the amount of words in a specific period of time, the tonality, all kinds of different things that are specific to schizophrenia and those particular symptoms. And then we've developed also visual features, such as microfacial features, the way you move. Schizophrenic patients have a tendency to move in certain ways, at a certain speed, certain angles, etc. and we measure those and provide additional insight. And again, our performance is very high. We're 85% in accuracy, and we can triage. So one of the big issues in mental health is the ability to triage. So I'll give you an example, a big specialist hospital in the US. It takes about 3 to 4 months to get that first appointment face-to-face. You walk in, you get your interview, you're basically tagged schizophrenic, depressive, anxiety, etc. Then it takes another 3 to 4 months to get a specialist meeting. So that's 8 months. By using our system, the triage can be done over the phone because we analyze your audio data and we can triage you with 85% accuracy, okay? Wow. So the reason we're working on these two specific areas, they're highly subjective, right? They're depending on the way you were trained, the expertise. Neurology, it's about 70 to 75%, what we call the inter-rater agreement. So you put a number of neurologists together, you give them the same EEG. 7 out of 10 will come up with a similar diagnosis, 3 won't. Mental health, it's a lot worse. In schizophrenia, it's 45%, right? So 4 out of 10, and depression is even lower. So what we're trying to do with what we're doing is basically taking a bit of subjectivity out of the whole equation. We're not here to replace anybody. We're here to assist and help diagnose, monitor. And so when you work looking at an EEG or looking at a patient with a mental health disorder, it's like you're having a lot of your colleagues behind you, because one of the other things that we do that's not done is we do multi-center analysis, okay? So one of the big issues with algorithms, and that was highlighted a few months back by the FDA, is a lot of those algorithms are data is taken from one center, trained on that data, and then it's tested on that center. And it works very well. The problem comes when you take that data or those algorithms and bring them somewhere else. A lot of times they fall flat because for various reasons, maybe the way it's, for example, in the EEG, different ways of annotating EEGs, different machines, etc. So what we do is we take data from a lot of different centers, from a lot of different people annotating and labeling that data with different experience. So we get a consensus. So when we move that data, so for example, we took a set of data that was trained in one hospital, we brought it to a hospital in Singapore, got 88% accuracy with it, okay? So we're within the same range of accuracy. And that's something that, so it's painstaking to do that, because it takes a lot of time to collect that data, especially in mental health, because you're dealing with people at risk. But our data, our algorithms are universal. They may be tweaked here and there, optimized for different data sets, but they're more or less within a range of accuracy that stays fairly constant.
So Michel, that could be worldwide. You don't need to tweak the data set too much to make the same conclusions worldwide?
With EEG, not at all. I mean, your brainwave, Gaurab's brainwave, Weishan's brainwave, mine, they're the same, right? It's there's no change. Mental health, different. There are cultural aspects that come into it. So for example, negative symptoms in schizophrenia, there are certain things that don't present in Asia, but that do present in the US or the UK. But the way we've developed our algorithms, it works perfectly in Singapore, is we believe they're universal, but we need that small data set from a specific country to optimize and tune and put the right weightage on the attributes.
Fascinating. Just going back to your kind of audio signals around kind of schizophrenia, does that extend to things like depression or anxiety?
Yes, it does. It does. Actually, if you look at the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, they cover quite a broad range, including cognitive impairment. And if you look at depression, a lot of those attributes overlap with depression. They overlap with PTSD. They overlap with anxiety. If you put them within a framework, basically you get 50 to 75% overlap on a lot of those. Schizophrenia symptoms, especially negative and cognitive symptoms, because they cover most of the range, then we can take what we've developed as a foundation for moving to other indication. So right now we've started working on PTSD, for example, getting some good results with a data set outside of Asia. But you know, again, the problem is it's very difficult to collect mental health data, you know, for obvious reasons, right? You're dealing with people at risk, etc. And you know, we'll talk about this later, but the privacy issues and security, very important. And it's one of the, you know, it's part of our DNA. You know, from the get-go, we started by thinking, okay, how do we collect that data? How do we preserve that data? How do we make sure we shield patients from any misuse of that data?
Okay, we are going to come back to that one. But let me just ask a quick question from the audience, just as I've got you here. Question, how well can consumer grade EEG, I think Muse is mentioned, I think it's a remote monitoring service. Are there any kind of at-home type services in this area?
Yeah, so there's a number of bands that have been developed, okay? So some have frontal electrodes, some have, you know, some electrodes here and there. Again, we're dealing with medical. Some of those things are for learning, you know, trying to better your learning, you know, monitoring your alpha and beta waves and things like that. Here we're dealing with actually trying to assess a person's, you know, whether they have spike, no spikes, etc. So like I said, I'd love to have somebody show me an EEG cap with electrodes that can be used in a medical setting or that's medical grade, right? Because then we would have a complete solution. Places like India, Indonesia, I could give this to a nurse already set up. She just puts it on in a rural clinic, sends it to us, we take it, we process it, and we serve it to a neurologist anywhere that can read that data and give an indication or a diagnosis. So yeah, I mean, the problem is most of those are a bit gimmicky or they're not very meaningful. We used a couple of those, we tried to use a couple of those bands. Some of them a bit more medically inclined. No, doesn't work.
Yeah, and of course, being highly accurate is really important, of course, in this area in particular. Rough guess, how many years do you think we might be away from something portable, usable in field that has a level of accuracy that you need?
I would say 18 to 24 months.
Okay.
Because I know a few companies that are working on that. The problem is a lot of those companies that are developing things like remote monitoring caps are more interested in deep brain stimulation, which is a big area. They're not really interested in modifying what they're doing for epilepsy or seizure detection. So I'm trying to find the right partner to do this. If anybody in the audience knows anybody, please send me a message.
There you go. There's a call to action. Yeah, let us know in the comments. Thanks, Michael. I'm going to come to Wisham now. Wisham, DNA testing, genetics, big area. I've had a DNA test done myself. It was fascinating. It was all about sort of precision health. And looking at what you do, I know that there's a huge amount that you can start to give indications around based on DNA, things like health risk, allergies, diet, weight, fitness, lots of information there. Tell us a little bit more about what you can measure and how can your customers start to use that to positively impact their health? Okay,
so if we talk about a person, it always has a part of nature and nurture, right? I think that's always how we explain to our customer. There's always a part about nature is what you have already inherited from your parents, from your family into your DNA. And there's always a nurture part where companies like, Activa is doing on lifestyle. Actionable is on your nurture part. It's along your life, how have you been doing to your body and how does that change the outcome? So what right now we're working on the nurture part, the nature part, where we tells you what are the things that you already inherited with. So for example, we talk about health risks. Based on our customers, 70% of Malaysians exposed to obesity. So you know, you can blame your DNA for being obese. So we want to make our customer to be aware of what they have born with, and through that, they can actually use different ways to measure themselves on the nurture part. So let's say you knowing yourself is having high risk of getting a diabetes, you can take a blood test right now to look at what is your glucose level, what is your HbA1c. So from that part, if you know you are normal, but then your DNA tells you you're high risk, so you probably would know you will need to take this particular test or any blood test every 6 months or every year to monitor yourself. So those are the measure, or those are the education part we try to tell our customer. It's by understanding who are you as a person, then you use multiple different things to actually monitor yourself throughout your life.
Great. And what about in a sort of more clinic setting? I mean, for example, if I go into hospital, is there any benefit in sharing, my DNA with the clinic or hospital? And are they geared up to look at it? So
we are actually in talk with a few hospitals over in Malaysia, but particularly we look at pharmacogenetics especially. So we are not looking, so hospital might not be interested in your nutrition level, your fitness, your weight management stuff of traits in DNA, but what they're looking at right now is more towards medication. So a DNA can tell us about, in a scientific term, it's called pharmacogenomics, but it's basically tell genetically how you respond to a certain drugs. So they are a huge category into neurology drugs. They are a very proven research into a statin, or we call the cholesterol drugs, where people like me, Chinese or Asians, we have a 30% chances of having side effects by consuming a certain statin, for example. So from hospital point of view, it's about cost saving, because right now it's a general practice. You come in with diabetes or hyperpressure, a particular set of guideline has been set, is this particular medicine given to you. 3 months come back, your markers doesn't control, I change the drug, I change the cost. So when the pharmacogenetic testing has been done on a particular patient, that can actually lower down any trial and error risk. So meaning that I can straight away know this medicine might work on this particular patient. So on a hospital or clinical level, they are looking into medicine effectiveness per se, and the bigger one will be onto cancer screening or even cancer drugs. So for example, I think this has been done in a certain hospital for more premium hospital, where they offer a DNA test for a cancer patient to identify which are the drugs is better for you. So that has been, I think, practiced in a few hospitals, but we can see the future of this being expanded into a lot more different area.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. And what about things like mental health? Does DNA have a role in perhaps helping me understand anxiety or depression, for example?
I think I would say they are research correlate these two together, DNA versus mental health or even your behavior. But to me personally, I still felt it's a little bit too vague to claim you have a certain mental issue because of your DNA. I think the research has to be a lot more strongly proven. Although countries in China, they are profiling their own citizens based on behavior. So your DNA tells you are a more violent person. So they give you a credit score, something like this is actually being done in China. But to me personally, or even to our company, we need a lot more evidence proof into linking between a mental health and a DNA. But then in terms of mental drugs or neurological drugs versus DNA, I think that's pretty strong evidence over there.
Great, very interesting. Let me take another question from the audience, which is related to this one actually, which is around sort of mental health and predictive applications for mental health. Gaurav, in Activa Labs, how does mental well-being play a role in your platform?
It does. So if you're having a balanced day, you're getting, again, coming back to the score of 80, you're trying to get 30 minutes of exercise in at a minimum, sit less than 8 hours and getting proper 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And you're doing that consistently. It can say, I'm not saying it will, and it can be an indicator that you are in a happy state of mind. We would not go into the disease state of mental well-being, but in terms of trying to understand how a person about mental resilience or distress for that matter. So if you're dwelling always in the past, and you're thinking about the past, and yes, that's depression. If you're upset about the future or you're worried about the future, that's anxiety, right? If you're not right in the middle, that's just what the entire world of mindfulness tells you about. So that's how you can really go around. But for us, the whole idea of having a balanced lifestyle is just about you being able to really grasp that whole concept. How you go about really measuring that level of whether your level of mental resilience. There are the usual standards. You could go about through a questionnaires of the world. You're the standard questionnaires, the academic questionnaires, whether it's from the World Health Organization or some of the known academic institutions. They have devised questionnaires to understand in which spectrum the user is in terms of stress and anxiety. Then the new digital data sources are coming up. You have the voice-based analytics, right? So how you sound can end up saying a lot about your mental state. There is also about analyzing metadata from your smartphone itself. What kind of apps do you have? Which ones do you use more? How often do you use? How often does someone call you? How often do you call someone? All these can end up painting a picture of that users on that scale. The question really comes down to, I think, many things you can do just in terms of looking at digital data that is out there. It's just that what you're going to do with that, how you're going to take that insights to actually drive a journey for that end user and help them be better, to help them be healthier and happier. So it really comes down to that. We have some plans, some of it in that space to go and have a conversation with our customers around the importance of mental resilience, especially with this new reality. All of us are at home right now. Last year I remember being at the Gallen Growth this conference. Now we are doing it all on Zoom right now. So it is a conversation that has been fast tracked, and we are definitely looking into this. And then that definitely has a clear say in terms of how you end up spending your 24 hours. Chronic diseases, for sure. I was having a conversation with my co-founder a few days back, and we were looking at some academic papers, and he said that 1 out of 3 suffer from depression if you have diabetes. How do you deal with that? A big part about management of your condition, if you're early stage diabetes, your diabetes, or even if you're pre-diabetic for that matter. Some of these conditions, you can maintain the status quo. In certain cases, conditions like pre-diabetes can be reversed. And all this can happen if you maintain or manage your lifestyle. A big part about taking that plunge or taking that step is that, are you in the right mental condition from a just resilience of stress or anxiety perspective? So this would be all merging lines. One leads to another. But yes, if you definitely need a consistently, someone's getting an Activa score of 80, that guy I would say is pretty sorted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. And Michelle, I mean, we sort of touched on this a little bit, but do you see the technologies that you're working on, which at the moment at least are more in a clinical setting, do you see those in time perhaps being available in the home and perhaps being part of, perhaps of what Gaurav offers to his customers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's part of the roadmap. If we project, 3 to 5 years down the road, mind science can start moving upstream, okay, going towards wellness and awareness. So for example, in mental health, if people are at risk because of genetics, family history, etc., we can help them monitor their mental health and intervene, in a timely manner by using the right biomarkers to prevent them from tipping over. Same thing with in neurology. Again, like I said, there's a big push and there's a big program that's currently being rolled out in Singapore, which we're part of, to actively monitor people at home instead of bringing them into an acute care setting, being able to do that at home, and the software that we have can do that as opposed to what's currently out there. So there's definitely a way for Mind Science to kind of expand its and project what we're doing. The other thing is, like Gaurav said, people with chronic disease have mental health issues, okay? Because it's about disease management. Certain diseases are easier to manage because medication works well, etc. Epilepsy and schizophrenia are two areas where the medication doesn't work so well. Okay, epilepsy, it's very tough to find the right epileptic drug for a patient. The dosage, it can take up to 3 to 5 years to find the right medication. Same thing with schizophrenia. What happens with schizophrenia is you get used to a certain drug, then you got to start the cycle all over, taking again 2 to 3 years, the dosage, increasing dosage, changing medication, etc. And the side effects of those drugs in schizophrenia are pretty nasty. The other thing is, in schizophrenia, the drugs that are available are mainly for what everybody equates with schizophrenia. You know, hallucination, I hear things, etc. So the psychosis part of it, what's called positive symptoms. Negative symptoms, there's no drugs. I think there's about $10 billion that's been spent in the last 14, 15 years to try to develop negative symptom drugs. Nothing. The only thing that works somewhat is cognitive behavior therapy. So basically you sit with a caseworker, psychologist or psychiatrist, and you have a face-to-face conversation. Again, what we do, we enable that, especially these days, right? But I think it's going to go forward because hospitals and the healthcare system is realizing, hey, this telehealth thing does have legs. It's not just a nice to have, but it can be part of the standard of care. And the fact that CMS in the US, for example, has put in codes to reimburse that, I think is a good thing, meaning that it's going to have some sustainability going forward, I hope. Yeah. But more and more doctors, I was talking to a friend on the West Coast this morning, and one of his relatives goes to a psychologist, and he has those telehealth calls, his doctor, Zoom calls, etc. I mean, it's going to become the standard of care, and we're very well placed to take part in this. Yeah.
Fantastic, great, thank you for that. I'm going to switch topic now to privacy. From two aspects, really, well, data security and privacy. Two areas, really. One is, of course, all of you are generating very personal levels of data. So two questions for you. One is around kind of security. How are you keeping that secure? The other one I'm interested in, we had a discussion last week actually with some US health tech startups, including one called Patientory. And their offering is actually to store data with access via blockchain. And it gives you, the individual, quite a lot of control over it. So you have your repository of data, and then it's securely released based on permissions to people in the healthcare profession. So two questions to you. How do you keep that very personal data secure? And how, just the whole area of data management, who owns the data? How do you grant access to that data? Wishan, let's maybe go to you first for that.
Okay, so yeah, I think this is a question we always being asked or even an inquiry by our customer. So we do it a few different ways. So first is we will always let the customer know that they own their own data. Whenever we process their sample, they always have a right to request for their raw data. That's first. Secondly, very true that all this data that we collected, especially on genetics, is very valuable for research. So we give our customer a chance for them to either opt in or opt out on any certain research that we wanted to be involved in. So we want our customer to have a sense of belonging to whatever data that they have provided. So for example, if you were to participate in a global COVID-19 research on DNA, then we'll send out an email to all our customers saying that currently we want to contribute to a certain vaccine research on this particular COVID-19. Are you willing to be part of this bigger cause? So that's how we get our customer to be engaged and also be involved in any research that we wanted to be involved in. So we don't want to have our customer to felt left out. So in terms of how we privacy is, in Malaysia currently we have, thanks to COVID-19, our government has set up a sandbox for health tech company or even financial company to come in, and we can actually leverage some of the government cloud-based security, and then we can park up our data in. So one of the things that we now try to do is to use government facilities. Hopefully that can also give a lot more confidence over to customer or even our Malaysian people. Government has no right to access those data unless it got consent from our customer. So I think those are a few ways that we are trying through to keep on strengthening the data privacy part, and also always to get our customer to be involved in whatever research they wanted to be part of.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it's a cultural thing here, but back in the UK, I think consumers might be highly sensitive around any suggestion that some kind of government or state authority is holding or perhaps having access to that data. But perhaps not such a concern in Malaysia.
I think there's still a concern. And in Malaysia, we are in the midst of changing a few different governments here and there. So, but what we try to do is we want to get ministry to be recognized that this data is sensitive and that it has to be protected in Malaysia. All we wanted to try to prevent is the data being leaked out to the other countries or being utilized over the other country, where over here we don't have a right to protect our data against that. So I think it's a collaboration between us and also a Ministry of Health over here. But then we also wanted to help, okay, not to say prevent, but to make sure the data, if it sits under government facility, but government has no right to direct access to all this data.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Gaurav, same question to you, and Wishan's comment there reminds me of many countries now have kind of geographic data laws that the data has to be stored within a particular market. How do you approach data and security?
Well, I think data sovereignty, because we work with insurance companies, and most companies, if you take, healthcare laws outside, insurance companies are required, they cannot share any data around insurance or their policyholders. Data cannot leave the country. And I think there's a technical answer to it. It's called AWS. You can do shardings. There's so many different ways in make sure that data sovereignty can be ensured. So we have an instance in Mumbai. So if we were working with insurers in India, the data doesn't leave India. If you have an instance here in Singapore, data doesn't leave Singapore. In Indonesia, we'll go on either the Ali Cloud or the Google Cloud, and make sure we shard it over there. There's no mirroring happening. So it's just that's the data sovereignty part is more so it's a technical question, can be solved with cost. It's just a question of cost. In terms of data privacy, that's a completely different thing. So the data privacy comes around, you have to first ask, number one, what is the objective of your platform, your business? And number two, the modality, the nature of engagement with that consumer who's sharing that data. So in that, the whole idea lies in terms of what can you do and then how you should be communicating with the consumer. So the consumer has to be told in absolutely very plain, clear language. We are GDPR compliant. So what we do is that exactly tell them what is the data we are capturing, for what purpose, and then what it would do for them, who can see that data, right? In what format, what are their rights, right? And how can that data be ever used, right? Whether it's for research or whether even if it is ever down the road for our purposes of reaching to them for marketing, that is also one piece. And then obviously, who would have access to that data in what format? Would they see that Matt slept for 6 hours, or would they never be able to see that. They will be able to see anonymized manner that men match age on average, how much do they sleep. So all these really comes down to the engagement, the partnership. In certain cases, we go directly to the consumer. That means our partner uses the Activa application or the Glucolife application, and then we give it out as is. In that case, we are both the data processor and the data controller. In certain cases, we are just providing our SDK that enables a much more richer conversation between the insurance company and their policyholders. In that case, we are just a data processor. The controller is still here, the insurance companies, and it is really coming down to the contract that they have with the end user ultimately. So it just really comes down to that, how you are engaging with the consumer, what you're saying, and then it ultimately comes down to what the consumer understands of what they feel and what they see. Yeah.
The clear data policy and sticking to that policy. Michelle, any last comments from you just in terms of privacy?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll start with data management. One of the way we think about data management is in terms of the life cycle of the data and the risk assessment of that data, okay? So, for example, as opposed to data that's coming out of a glucose pump, right, that's attached to a patient, if somebody interferes with that, it has severe life consequences. Our data, the risk level is different. Okay, we collect private data, obviously. We don't collect any kind of data. We collect specific data, and we put certain risk level to that data, and now we manage that data. So, like Gaurav said, we use cloud HIPAA compliant cloud infrastructure. We're GDPR compliant, and we also use the ISO 27000 series of best practices as far as it applies to us as a startup, obviously. But all this is in terms of the way we manage the data, okay, and especially the mental health data, because that's the risk level is much higher, especially and including the people from which that data is collected. In terms of privacy, again, it's people are aware that we collect that data. We get patient consent, especially mental health, right? So again, we have to adapt to the jurisdiction. So in the US at the federal level, it's one person consent, which means if one person's on the phone, the other person doesn't have to consent as long as that one person consented. And then you have to go down to the state level where it's two-party consent. In Europe, it's different again across the jurisdiction. So we have to adapt to that by basically adapting to the worst case scenario, right? And then everything above that, takes care of itself. But like I said before, privacy, data privacy and data security, the way we store that data, how long we store that data, how long do we keep it? So for example, in mental health, we can take that audio data, just extract what we need out of it and then throw out the rest. So if you intercept that data, if you're a hacker, you can't tell anything from the data because it's just bits of features here and there. So we're very cognizant of how we need to process that data to kind of maintain a maximum level of security and privacy.
Thank you, Michelle. Great panel, as always with these things, we just scratched the surface here, and there were lots of questions we didn't quite get to, but thank you so much, a really kind of fascinating area. We're going to return to this topic again, certainly in our main health summit later in the year. But Michelle, Ushan, Gaurav, thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.